Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call to order the December 6, 2018 Issaquah City Council Land and Shore Committee. I'm the chair, Stacy Goodman, and to my right is Councilmember Tola Martz, Council President Tola Martz, I apologize. And then to his right is Councilmember Paul Winterstein. We have 3 items on the agenda tonight. Agenda Bill 7329, Agreement for Dedication of Land regarding the Gateway development. Agenda Bill 7683, Amendments to Issaquah Municipal Code 18.07.480, Community Facilities Standards regarding public buildings. And Agenda Bill 7680, Amendments to Central Standards Table 4.3A, Level of Review. And we will provide a time for public comment after each of the agenda items tonight. So let's get started. The first item is Agenda Bill 7329, Agreement for Dedication of Land regarding Gateway, presented by Lucy Sloman, Land Development Manager.
It's a park, so it's green.
Yay.
Tonight we are here as Stacy said about the dedication of Gateway Park. And the question that we're asking of the council is to grant the mayor or her designee authority to accept the dedication. Now, all dedications do not have to come to the council. You may remember this from our Timber Ridge discussion earlier this year. If, for instance, there's a street and the street clearly, the cross-section of the street is clearly identified in standards or adopted documents, we don't have to come back to you. But where a plan has just kind of a blob and the exact location and configuration is not identified, then we do have to come back to you, which is why we're here tonight. This particular dedication contains 3 elements: a public multi-use trail and boardwalk, which is called a shared use route in central Issaquah, a public park, and a wetland. So the park, this is Newport, I-90 is up here, Raleigh Properties is over on the right. The park is located approximately here. The shared use route comes through and connects over to here. And we'll go into all of this in more detail. This is the last step in a multi-year process, probably like 5 years worth of work. And I just wanted to point out, as the agenda bill does, that we can talk about park impact fees tonight if you're interested in doing so. The IMC and Central Issaquah actually delegate that authority to the director, and so that has already been negotiated, but you may very well have questions about that. So background. In 2013, the council adopted the Central Issaquah standards, which included a community spaces chapter. And the requirements of those, or the locations of those, were shown on Figure 7B, a snippet of which is shown on the left here. The Gateway property is outlined in red, and I want to apologize. I discovered when I printed my packet that the graphics did not appear as I had done them. So this was not translucent, so it may have seemed like a rather odd graphic. But what this is showing is the location of the neighborhood park and shared use route that were adopted in the Central Issaquah plans, and then how that relates to the property. The Wolf Company, not long after Central Issaquah was adopted, began discussing how to develop the Mull Farms property, also in 2013. Where Central Issaquah standards show both a neighborhood park and a shared use route on a piece of property, the city has to identify which one they choose. So as I pointed out, both of those were shown, and the city decided that they selected a shared use route. The reason that that was selected was that it seemed like our only opportunity to get a non-motorized connection from Mountains to Sound Greenway and Newport through to the Gilman, through the Raleigh property to Gilman Boulevard. This seemed like, given that there were not many mixed uses out in this area, getting a more direct and more pedestrian-friendly route to retail and commercial areas seemed like an important opportunity. There also seemed like there was a small possibility for a park in another location. I will note that both elements from where they were shown in central Issaquah, which is kind of near I-90, were moved closer to Newport Way. So when the Wolf property, as Wolf began to think about how they wanted to use the property, they identified the type and number of units. It was around 400 apartments. Based on the kind of housing units they wanted to build and the way they thought the market would absorb it, 400 was the maximum they saw building on the property. The product they picked was 5-story buildings towards I-90 and 3-story buildings elsewhere on the property. However, Central Issaquah also has a requirement for a minimum floor area ratio, or FAR, of 0.75. And with that number of buildings on that size property, they did not meet the minimum. So their proposal to the city was, along with dedicating the shared use route, which we had selected and which was required to be dedicated to the city, they proposed also dedicating land for the park. And then also dedicating the wetland, which would assist us in partnering with the Rallies to continue restoring Tibbetts Creek. The site development permit was approved in 2015. It's under construction, and the first half dozen or so units have received temporary certificate of occupancy. So now I'm going to go through the 3 components in a little more detail. Total acreage that is proposed in this dedication is 6.1 acres. So the first element of that 6.1 acres is the shared use route. It's shown in blue and then this little bit of turquoise area. The dedication of the shared use route implements both the Central Issaquah standards and the park strategic plan. Both land and improvements would be dedicated. The dark blue portion would be the only one that would receive park impact fee credits. Where it is not going through the wetland, it is 10 to 12 feet wide and concrete. And where it goes through the wetland, it is a diamond pier system. Basically, that's a low impact method for installing a boardwalk through a wetland. I just want to note that even though the blue line stops at the eastern property, Wolf and Raleigh are negotiating on how that connection will happen, and we have no reason to think that it won't. The park. So that is the green and yellow area. That also implements Central Issaquah and the park strategic plan. I'll have some more detail about the park strategic plan in a moment. They would be dedicating the land. They would be doing preliminary improvements for which they would receive park impact fee credits. The preliminary improvements and basically set the stage for a future full development, but create an open space area for public use at this time. The site would be graded. There would be some walls to assist with the grading. There would be parking, a utility stub for a future bathroom if the Parks Department chooses to have one, and the whole area would be planted mostly with grass. The other point I want to make, this was a part of a larger graphic that was included. I got this question a lot when the land use permit was being reviewed. This park is in addition to the private facilities that Wolf is providing as part of their project. So these brighter green areas, got to get the mouse to wake back up. So this kind of wedge-shaped piece is their clubhouse and pool and sort of community facility, and then they also have this grassy area over here. Public park is down here on either side of the shared use route. The last component of the dedication is the wetland. It's the orange property shown all the way on the east. It would implement portions of the 2011 Raleigh Development Agreement. There would be a dedication of land, but no park impact fee credit except for the boardwalk, which we already talked about. And really, this is setting the stage for a partnership in both acquiring land and restoring the creek. As you may remember or know, this sort of southern area down here was restored by the Raleighs before the development agreement. There was a recognition during the time that the development agreement was being prepared that the ditch in which the creek currently exists is not a way that we want to leave it. The creek would be relocated out into the wetland area and a portion of it restored. These are two diagrams from the Raleigh Development Agreement. This western dashed line represents the edge of the buffer. So this would be a sort of joint area of improvement. The city would be responsible for parts. The Raleighs might be responsible for parts, but the funding for that may very well be something that we acquire together as part of restoring that whole wetland and creek section. As I've been discussing, this is implementing various, oh, I'm sorry.
Just have a question. Can you go
Sure.
back? So you talked about that if this land was to be dedicated to the city with the wetland on it, and that provides an opportunity to relocate the creek there, and that we may find funding together, is there anything in the Raleigh Development Agreement that obligates the city, or is this just coming up as an opportunity? Without this land dedication, the city wouldn't, there isn't anything that obligates the city to participate in any of that creek relocation, or do you recall?
So it's not a direct obligation, but I think that in our talks with the Raleighs, and Christy Tirpel's here, and I'm sure we'll be glad to add more, there are certain funding sources that only the city can apply for, but which would allow both of us to work and fund the restoration. So I think you're right that there may not be a direct obligation, but in terms of achieving the vision that we've established, it will very likely take a partnership.
Certainly some sort of a good faith obligation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Park Strategic Plan, this was a great opportunity to go back and look at Central Issaquah and say that the community space section, it was adopted as part of a much bigger plan. Are the things that are shown in there still the things that make sense for the community? That was adopted this year, as you well know. So there are a number of things that relate to the pieces that we're looking at here. One is that number 13 under the strategic project list is Gateway Park and Newport Park. In speaking with the Parks Director, they see this the park within Gateway as an essential first step because it is a piece of developing that recreational facilities out in this area where there are none right now. In addition, the plan shows the shared use route as a piece of the pedestrian bike connections to connect to the Green Necklace, and also in dedicating including the wetland with the dedication, it's an opportunity for the Tibbetts Creek trails that were envisioned as part of the Green Necklace to be brought forward. All of these are near-term projects that were listed in the strategic plan. I've included snippets here. Number 7, I realized was not in your materials, by the way. I realized that as I was putting this together and studying a little more closely and confirming with the Parks Department. I'm learning the document. So I've included in this slide, but it doesn't show up in your materials. So some of the public benefits that staff and administration see through this dedication, it would be implementing a number of plans that have been adopted. It would implement community spaces for Central Issaquah, Parks Strategic Plan Near-Term Strategies 13 and 7, as well as a connection to the Green Necklace, meeting partnership obligations through the Raleigh Development Agreement, and then more specifically, it would acquire that non-motorized shortcut from Mountains to Sound Greenway in Newport through the Raleigh properties to Gilman Boulevard, better serving that neighborhood. It would acquire a park in an area where there are none right now. And I think lastly, it is consistent with the vision and sort of actions that the city has been taking for many years in terms of acquiring, preserving, and restoring properties near creeks. Rather, for a long time, our community developed in a way that sort of took advantage of, but didn't necessarily protect creeks. And by acquiring this and working together on the restoration, it really is an opportunity to take a big step forward in restoring one of our key creeks. And so the recommendation of the administration is to authorize the mayor or her designee to accept this dedication and allow staff to keep moving forward in that process.
Thanks. So what does it mean to recommend accepting the dedication, but the language about not approving the park impact fee?
So the park impact fee in the Issaquah Municipal Code and Central Issaquah Standards is delegated to the director. It's technically delegated to the DSD director, but in this case, we felt that the park director was in a better position to be negotiating that. So it is not, it's information that we felt that the council might want to understand and know, but it isn't something that we are asking for you to authorize.
That sentence is perhaps a little kludgy. It's not, it says, therefore, the administration is asking for authorization to accept this dedication, but not approval for the park's impact fee credit. You're not asking for approval, not that you're asking for us to not approve. Now I get it. A little confusing. Okay.
Sorry.
Next, so what's the path going to look like if the path were built tomorrow? If we said yes on this and you guys waved your magic wand, and it would dead end at the edge of Rowley properties, right?
It would connect to 19th Avenue within Raleigh.
That's onto Raleigh property,
Right.
right? We're talking about the property, we're talking about a property that's not Raleigh property. Is there a path right now on the Raleigh property that goes to where the path we're talking about would intersect?
So let me get to GIS just so we can make sure that you can see. Do that a different. The eastern edge of the Mull property is very close to 19th Avenue. That's where the negotiation that Rowley and Wolf are concluding for an easement to both construct the very end of the path and to access it. So let's see, probably this is better. So you can, this is the throat that's coming out from the Gateway project. The path goes around these trees. You can see their property is here, the creek, and then the road. So the boardwalk is designed to go all the way to the edge of the road. And then the Rowleys have begun working with the city on a wayfinding signage program to help people who are coming and going from that connection understand how to get to other landmarks in the area.
So if we could wave our magic wand and do everything that this bill would enable, it would, for the time being, sort of dead end, right, at the edge of the Rowley property. This would require additional, separate, independent work by the Rowleys to develop their side of that boundary, yes?
It connects to a roadway that is shared, can be shared by bikes and cars and pedestrians. It's a very low-speed road that then connects down to Gilman Boulevard.
Well, I understand what that road is, but they have property to the west of that road for some, I'm going to guess 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet,
So
something like
if
that.
your question is getting to 19th actually reliant upon a piece of work to be done between Wolf and Rowley's? I think the
Correct.
answer is yes.
Okay.
That's happening now. Magic Wand is the boardwalk gets built, that piece is done, and it dumps you onto 19th, where you could either go to Gilman or to the new brew house.
No, I get, once you're on
Yeah.
19th, I understand the benefits
Yeah.
of being on 19th. But this does require separate work by a different group of people to make this thing complete, right? And so you're saying the Rowleys are working on it currently?
Yes.
Yes, they're probably talking about it right now.
Okay. Okay, I just want to make sure I understand. This doesn't,
no.
this bill
There's another
doesn't
piece.
take us to 19th. Okay.
It does not.
Well, this bill, right, not with public dedication. However, Christy Triple left me a voicemail today, and we recognize that the Wolf and the Rowleys are negotiating that for construction of that last, whatever, 10 or 15 feet. It is also, we've had the city attorney reviewing that easement because we will become the successors of that easement to ensure that it is a public route all the way to the edge of 19th.
Got it.
And so I think partly they're wanting to, it's a kind of horse before the cart, trying to make sure that this is moving forward, then they will complete those documents. They have been negotiating on those for quite a while, so they're very close.
So, and just to maybe help a little bit, because you're bringing up a great point, so President Martz. So 19th is a private road. So even if this piece happens, Rowley's could put up a fence around the end of the boardwalk. But they can't, because in the development agreement with Rowley's, there is a requirement to cross the creek with a non-vehicular access way, and this is what that is.
And I'm not attempting to cast any aspersions
Yeah.
on anybody's intent on this. I just want to understand legislatively, there's this,
Yeah.
and then there's another
Another
thing
piece,
that's
yes.
going on in parallel. I have more questions, but I'm happy to let somebody else take some oxygen.
Christy Triple from Raleigh is here. Is there a desire from the committee or also a desire from Christy to come to the microphone? So maybe we ask questions or she has some information she might like to. Great, thank you.
Hi, Christy Triple, Raleigh Properties, 1595 Northwest Gilman Boulevard, Suite 1. So I understand you have a series of questions, and I'll do my level best to answer them for you, and not speak too much unless you need more. We've been working with the Wolf property since prior to them acquiring the property, to kind of share some of the constraints and what we understand about the land. So we've been working to be really good neighbors. We understand that that's important for connectivity to the neighborhoods along Newport and the new residents that'll be living in those multifamily homes, and as well as the connectivity into the rest of the city. So to answer your immediate question about what happens when that boardwalk lands on 19th over the creek, we are actually, and we agreed to early on and up front, to provide a legal easement to the Gateway Apartments, which will eventually be deeded to the city if it's accepted. We had a temporary construction easement for the construction of the boardwalk, so we've been working very closely with that all along. And then the permanent easement will be what's recorded with King County that basically says there's an access easement for public enjoyment that allows folks to enter onto 19th safely and to go left or right, depending on which way they want to go in accessing the property. We have been knowing since this was coming, we've been doing organic improvements in Hyla Crossing to help facilitate even further the pedestrian and bike experience. So we've been putting in some gravel sidewalks. We've completed the extension of some sidewalks that were needed throughout the property. We put in a pedestrian striping along 19th, the whole spans. I am super happy. I just recently got the okay to do frog sharrows for directional assistance to bikes. That was a sense of whimsy that we wanted to add to the property since Hyla is Latin for frog. Let's see, what else? What other questions might you have?
Sure.
Do you expect there to be anything you need from the city on doing this? Is there expected to be any ask of council related to this? Or also, we talk about a partnership on setting up creek restoration further up. I see the development agreement is not super explicit about how the costs and effort is shared. So how does Rowley see both of these pieces in terms of any potential supplemental ask of council?
Good question. So on the boardwalk and the dedication of that 5 acres, we're super excited to see that, absolutely supportive. That piece of property has been unloved for decades, and so we're really happy to see a good steward taking possession of that. We've been working really closely with Mountains to Sound Greenway over the last many years to help remove invasive species that have creeped into all of the restoration work that was done prior. So when they took a look at that property, they said that was a challenge and it needs some support. So a lot of blackberries, so we'll be excited to know that we can work together on that. In terms of the Tibbetts Creek Greenway and the alignment, we've been in conversations with administration about a comprehensive approach. When you talk about the development agreement not really being explicit, there's a lot of complications, and without delving too deeply into the history of Tibbetts Creek Greenway, I think you might all remember or have heard it took excuse me, let me take that back. It took well over 10 years to get the approval to move the creek. It was, and it took about 10 to 12 different agencies. And so you think about 20 years ago how complicated that was. Fast forward to today, it's going to take a lot of people to make this happen and some leadership. And so I think it's the right thing to do. Are we going to do it tomorrow or maybe next year or the year after? It depends on what the city is looking at and what the rallies are able to do. So that's a conversation that needs to continue once a decision is made.
Because the reason I ask is, I mean, this is basically a $2 million path, right? It's reducing impact fees by a couple $1 million. And I'm just trying to understand in this vision of how this area works, if there's any hidden or substantial downstream costs that, you know, that changes the ultimate price tag of what we're talking about in this area.
So, so the property, the wetland, once it becomes under our ownership, will take city resources to continue the work that Christy has mentioned, where the Rowleys and Mountains to Sound have worked on removing invasives. You know, you need to remove the invasives, then you need to plant, and then you need to get the canopy to keep the invasives from coming back. So that's long-term obligation and stewardship of the property that would be ours. The park space as well, as was described by Lucy, it's being set up as grass and walls and some flat pads. I think Parks Department envisions a kind of a community conversation about what that should ultimately look like. There will be an ask that will come before the council to say, okay, now we're ready to move forward with park improvements. This is what the community would like to do, and here's what that ask will be. So I think each one of these pieces, and obviously the boardwalk itself will require maintenance over time. Everything does. So, so all those pieces are part of, I think, the conversation and the thought process that you should be going through right now.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that, I think of this as sort of a $2 million investment, when you talk about the dollars in the city. I just want to make sure we weren't saying, well, at the end it's going to be 5.
Right.
Right? Because there's
Right.
3 in XYZ.
Right. So try and, in a way, if you can compartmentalize it, try and keep the greenway relocation and the costs associated with that separate from this, because that's really in the Raleigh Development Agreement. So what is there is there. We're still working on that trajectory. There is not envisioned today to be an ask of the City Council to fund anything associated with that. We may be the askers of grant funds or things like that to try and help facilitate that movement. But in terms of this ask tonight with this AB, open space, wetlands, stewardship, boardwalk maintenance, future park improvements.
Well, do you have anything?
Are you ready for Lucy again?
Yes, I'm ready for you to begin. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lucy has left the building.
So Lucy, you mentioned the Diamond Pier Boardwalk.
Yep.
What's that like?
Well, I thought you might ask that. I put together some snippets. This photo is from their brochure. It is not what this one will particularly look like, but I wanted to give you an image. This is the way they work. It's this kind of complicated
Landmine.
cap through which they drive spikes in to support the weight. This is the actual pathway to connect to 19th. It has approximately this profile with this dashed line here being the ground plane. So you can see that from Gateway it starts about 10 feet higher. But we see that partly as an advantage because it gives passage for animals underneath, which was a condition of the site development permit. And part of the reason that it turns and does this is to ensure that it meets ADA, so that it is a connection for everyone. This is just a snippet of what it would look like if you cut a section across it and looked along its length.
So it's going to be 2 or 3 feet above ground.
Well,
Washington.
yes, down here, that may be true, but here it's closer to 10.
Right. Okay, but it's not close to, it's not,
It's not sitting on the ground, no.
Okay, and then my last question is, there's one inconsistency in the drawings, or in the pictures that you've shown tonight. There's sort of what I think of as an upper park or a westernmost park that shows up in some of the pictures and then doesn't, so there, it's not present,
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. It's
and
here.
there it is.
Yes.
What's
So when, you're very observant.
Some days are better than others.
So when, some of the images that you have seen are from during the site development permit review, and some of them are where we are today. We tried to put the years in there, but unless you were really looking for cues or your CSI skills were really on high, you might not have noticed. So initially, we were talking about all of this. The area that we're currently talking about is the park, as well as what we call the triangle parcel. But as the project has moved forward through design, There is now a stormwater vault to serve the roundabout that will be buried but is there. And there are just a number of things like that that happened. And through the work that the Parks Department did with Wolf in evaluating it, we just all agreed that this really wasn't going to serve as open space, and really the city did not want to own it, and Wolf has agreed to hold on to it. So that's why it's inconsistent. It sort of depends on which graphics I grabbed.
So it's never going to get built, right? Because it's
Well,
got-
they're going to improve it with some grass area, and there's a street wall requirement, and there are various improvements they're going to make to it, but it will be a passive open space kind of introduction to their project.
Privately owned.
Privately owned.
Yes.
And it's zoned as such?
Well, the zoning is village residential, so that would allow it to be publicly or privately owned. Am I answering the question you're asking?
Well, what if they changed their mind about what they wanted to do in that space?
Well,
Could they build a building on it? Is that your question? I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately?
Yeah.
Sure. They own it. I mean, there's no encumbrance on it that we have. It would need to meet any other standards like setbacks and site, if there were site distances through that parcel. All that would have, but it's still privately owned.
So what's the little finger between the triangle, the not triangle park and the lands we're talking about?
so this area?
Yes.
So this, continuing all the way around here, is Sammamish Point condominiums.
Existing.
So that, you can very faintly not see it on your, up there, but this actually is a building right here.
There is, I see, there's. Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Lucy, could you go back one slide, please?
This way? Or,
It's not, the one that
This-
showed the boardwalk over the wetland,
oh, sure.
front deck, maybe?
This one?
Yeah. What's, I'm sure it's in the material, I know I read
That's,
it.
actually,
What's the
this
width-
is new
what's-
material. I was just trying to think about what you might ask me.
The width of,
10 feet.
and how high are those railings? Roughly?
They're at least 42 feet. We may have required them to be,
No, I mean,
42 inches.
thank you. I appreciate you listening. No wonder Jeff was looking at me with these big eyes. Okay, they are 54. I thought they might be because of bicycle use.
54, okay. By the
54
way, you had
inches.
a whole bunch of people correcting you on that one.
I have a lot of phone a friend out there.
Okay, 10 feet and 54. I'm just trying to, I know that with railings that high, when there is a jog in the path, and you got railings on this side, the width matters if you're cycling. Almost no matter what speed you're on, because your line of sight and there's a perception of, I really don't want to be that close to railings that high. And so I don't know if 10 feet's better than a lot of other ones that are around here that have that, but
So I just want to clarify so the boardwalk would be built by the developer,
Yes,
by Wolf,
yes.
until it gets all the way to the Raleigh property line,
Yes.
and then how it gets built from there to the road.
Oh, no, so they actually have a permit and are under construction for the
Okay.
boardwalk. So they have it's permitted, but obviously they cannot build the eastern segment until the easement is finalized.
Okay.
But the full thing has been designed, because they had to begin the summer, during the summer season, clearing for that route.
Thank you. No other questions? Okay, thank you. I think we are ready for public comment. Is there anybody here in the audience that would like to make a comment on the agenda bill?
So I don't think I've seen the plans for the boardwalk, because I don't think those were a thing that came out into the land of public. But I do wonder if we're building an expensive boardwalk and going over Tibbetts Creek, and then we're shortly moving Tibbetts Creek, is the boardwalk being built to accommodate the future move of the creek? You don't, they'll yell if you answer, but that is my question for you to ask them. And I would like to know if the adjacent parcel has been notified that this is where the park is going to go, because it is a move from the original, what they thought it would originally be. So I don't know if they've been informed and that their screening is still going to stay in place so that they aren't, that they're happy and satisfied, because this is a change, right? And that wetland is going to be a booger. Thanks, bye.
Thank you. Anybody else like to, David?
David Kapler, 255 Southeast Andrews. I did have the same independently arrived question about the span where the future creek will be, if we can guess where that is, and have a longer, different construction of that section so that the creek can be there, hopefully, in that place. I know there's sketches of where they think it might be, but it seems like it's a pretty flat area. There can be some flexibility. We should be able to guess where that creek in the future would be and not have to tear out part, put a different span in, pull out some of these anchors or whatever to have a wide enough space there. There's a heck of, if it's built like this one looks like something down from the Nisqually Delta or something on salt water, but there's a heck of a lot of wood there, and so there's going to be some maintenance and replacement over time and all. I'm hoping those construction materials and everything are good. I hope we're not, the decking is meeting some very strict requirements, so we don't have to replace the decking like we had to do on the boardwalks along 900. I think we've learned those lessons, and I'm counting on that being covered. What I really want to talk about is the second bridge. Christy knows what I'm, because when I walked in at the Rowley review we had on October 25th, Rowley over time is expected to put in a second bridge over the creek. Because they've done such a fantastic job on much of the southern part of the creek corridor in there, a bridge over the creek would have to span all these adjoining wetlands and overflow places for the creek. It would be a very long bridge. But if you line up the bridge at Maple, which connects the Bergsma property to the north end of the parking lot perfectly, a relatively short span of bridge. Now, on this side is Rowley, on the east side of the creek is Rowley, but the city owns the property that's on the west side of Maple there. And I really think that bridge should be a priority, partly because this is going to be a play structure. There's going to be kids hanging out at this bridge all the time, unfortunately carving their initials in it and those things too. But this thing is going to be very attractive, which is cool. It's going to be really nice. But it's not going to be where the serious bicyclists are going to be that interested in riding through there. They would do much better staying on Newport, crossing at Maple, and then being on Maple if they're going through. So in terms of getting the faster bicyclists and that crew off of this bridge and having this be the carriages, the kids and the walkers and the slow bicyclists, that'd be great. But let's keep thinking about that. And at some point, rallies are going to need something that doesn't work for them in the development agreement, and maybe we can get this bridge at the south end, which is likely the end of their development, in before too many decades. Okay? Thank you. And I left some copies here. that are my letter from October 25th and some of the copies of some of the language in the development agreement that refer to that bridge. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody else like to make public comment? Going once, going twice, gone. So we had a couple of questions. So both Connie and David asked about whether the boardwalk would be affected by moving the creek.
So part of the advantage that we saw of the Diamond Pierce system is that it's relatively easy to disassemble. So we're not trying to locate where the creek is because the redesign and restoration of the creek has not taken place yet. There's a concept plan. So the bridge and system that is being designed now and built now can be taken apart and swapped between the part that's spanning the creek and the part that's extending east of the creek. So it's been taken into consideration, but maybe not in the way that they would have preferred it, which is building a bridge for the existing creek and the future creek.
Is that a city expense in the future to do that?
I think whoever's restoring and moving the creek would be responsible for that.
Which wouldn't be the city, or would be the city? We don't know.
I don't think it would be the city.
Okay. What about, we also had a question about the material of the boardwalk.
I would defer to Jen Fink on that because we've been working very closely with the Parks Department and she has been doing the detailed review.
Hi. So the boardwalk material is mostly constructed of wood.
You just say who you are, just for folks who are watching.
Jennifer Fink, Park Planner.
Thanks.
Most of the framing is all wood, pressure-treated woods. The decking is actually, they call it a pull-traded fiberglass. So it's lightweight. It's got small little I-beams in it. It drains through. It's got a rough textured surface, so it has real long life, longevity, and is used quite frequently in wet areas. So on cold or dewy mornings, there would be a lot of friction, so you know, reduce the amount of slipping on the thing. But it has a very long lifespan, that decking material.
So comparing it to the boardwalk on SR 900, I think there have been some issues with. Would you say that there's a better material?
I believe so. And the spacing is a little wider between each of the slats on the decking to allow, you know, dirt and materials and leaves to pass through, more so than what's occurring over there.
Any questions on any of that?
Yeah, I have a question related to that. So I have not been on the boardwalk much, but my question about surfacing is around, I used to commute in on the Issaquah Preston Trail on the north side of 56th. There's a bridge, a short little bridge of wood, and I've had my bike come out from under me 3 times on that little. And by the second time, I was being super careful, and my bike still came out from under me. So you're telling me that things have improved, and it's not whatever that sort of surfacing is. We don't use. I think that's just wood.
Yeah.
Yeah, and wood gets wet.
Yeah. No, this has a really rough texture to it. You know, I mean, it's smooth. If you run your hand over it, you're not going to cut your hand, but there is texture to it to provide traction.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So David made some comments about the second bridge. So just to help me understand, I'm gathering that those are comments for us to keep in mind. I don't think it's not relevant to this.
Right. The Raleigh Development Agreement showed 3 different locations. Let me go back to the GIS. So there was sort of a northern, a central, and then a southern location. And so Dave Kapler was talking about this one, which more or less aligns with Maple. There was another one that would have come off of this kind of park space, and then there was a northern one. So we considered this one to be the northern connection. When we were working on Riva, Riva was showing a possible connection here, and we met with the Rowleys and said, do you want us to do that so you could have that middle connection? And they said now that the northern one is coming in, they really see the southern one as being the appropriate future one. But that's as far as those discussions have gone.
And then I have one other question, and that is about what other options we might have. Because and you can tell me, but it seems that since the boardwalk is under construction, that our options would be to not accept the land dedication and then therefore not credit most of, or if any of the park impact fees, and then we would just do something else with that money. I'm not saying that's a good option, but are those our option? Is that our option?
I think it's more challenging with the shared use route because that was the item that the city selected, and Central Issaquah shows that it would be owned by the city. So I'm not sure how much choice there is there. I think that the park potentially could be that element. However, because this has been negotiated, the cost is known, it implements both Central Issaquah and strategic plan, I think it would again be difficult to say why we would not carry out two different plans that have shown a park in this area.
Okay, so thank you for that. It sounds like we've partially made a policy, or pretty much made a policy decision already. I just wanted to be clear on what the options were, so that explains it to me. Any other questions? So, the agenda bill calls for a recommendation from the committee. That's the wrong one. To go back to the full council on the 7th of January, I believe.
And to direct the mayor or her designee to sign
And to direct the mayor or her designee to sign the dedication documents. So that's the recommendation from the administration.
Okay, so anything other than that, so if we wanted another touch, for example, if there was any reason for another touch, then we would have to send it back to the council and then have it referred back to the committee, which would be, that's the other option. So I think I support the administration's recommendation. And I understand the fact that the shared use route was identified and already in the plan and all of that. I will say it's not really doesn't have anything to do with this particular development. I'm disappointed in the lack of opportunities that we created in that area. But again, that doesn't really have anything to do with this, because this is what it is. We were just a little bit too late on figuring out that we maybe should have paid more attention to that. So I wish there was a larger park area here. And on the other hand, I'm also happy to see that we'll have a connection over to the 19th, and I'm happy that the Rowley properties and Wolf are working together on that. I think we've slightly estimated the maintenance costs. But I don't know what we do about that.
So I still, it is what it is, and thank you for clarifying that our options are fleeting, or not fleeting, but there's a long list of options in front of us. This, what was called Triangle Park, so there's a roundabout right there, and I get a little nervous because we don't really know from what it sounds like, you don't really know what's going to go on that You're saying I mean, my experience, businesses tend to maximize the profit of their investments. And so I worry a little bit. This is where the trail begins, right? So you've got a roundabout, you've got the trailhead, and you've got this space next to it that I don't think we have a super clear idea of what that's going to look like and whether that's going to be particularly inviting for people to walk by. So, but I don't feel like I'm going to, I mean, you can either say yes to this or no to this, and I'm going to say yes to it. But I don't like that western end of it. To me, it feels like it has some question marks associated with it. And if there's any way when this gets back to full council to have to feel a little bit better about the question marks associated with the western end of the trail, then I would be happier. Although, like I said, I'm going to recommend we move forward with this.
Do you want to see what the concept looks like?
No, because it sounds like it's not a binding. There's
We
nothing
have
that
a
says-
permit in for construction that we're in the midst of reviewing.
Bullet's point is it could change over time.
Yes, it
It's private property.
is private property. On the other hand, they would need some kind of land use permit if they take it in a different direction. They couldn't just unilaterally decide to build a building on it tomorrow.
6-story, Capitol Records style tower.
Cool.
I'm thinking not, but not in that location. Maybe a mile northeast. But anyhow, I mean, again, I can say yes or no, and I'm saying yes. But the western end of it just doesn't seem as well. I just don't know quite as well how grounded it is as the rest of it.
Well, and the only way I think you get over that, and I think you could have a conversation with maybe the park director about that if you wanted to. I mean, the only way you get over that is you include that as a dedication. I think Wolf would be glad to dedicate that. I think they originally wanted to. I think we told them we did not want that as part of the package because of certain reasons why we felt like that triangle was semi-compromised. And I wasn't in all those conversations. I'm probably saying more than I should, but I think the property owner was, yeah, I know, right? So the property owner, I think, was originally on the table as part of the dedication and then has been taken off at our direction. So if that is something you want to kind of unpack a little bit tonight, I mean, I think the right people are in the room to have that conversation.
I mean, if we're going to spend, let's say Councilmember Goodman's right, and our estimate of maintenance is a little low, right? Maintenance is $20,000 or something like that a year, I think is the number we threw out, wasn't it?
No, it was 11.
11. So, if it's 20 and you tell me it's going to be 30 to maintain, a parcel that's right next to that roundabout, and we get to know what that parcel looks like, and it's the beginning of that trail, then it seems like an interesting conversation to have.
Parks Director Jeff Watling is just so excited to come up to the microphone.
Yeah, Jeff Watling, all right. Good questions, lots of moving parts as the Parks Department became engaged in this about a year and a half ago. Specific to that triangle property, I think to understand some of the dynamics, there's an 18-foot elevation change in that triangle space. So it's hard to pick that up in that, it's not a flat space. As this was unfolding and recognized that there was going to be a storm water detention purpose and a vault in that space, recognizing the need and desire of the developer to really be their landscaped entrance into their development, the capability of this to be a park space was really immensely limited. I can't speak to its future developability other than to say there's an 18-foot elevation change and a stormwater detention vault on that space that could infringe on how it might be developed a different way. To the maintenance question, which is a great one, the maintenance estimate we put into this is really looking at what we know right now. And what we know right now is maintaining it in its as-is condition. So we were not trying to project, knowing that, as was said before, in terms of that smaller park space, wanting to have public engagement before we propose or do capital improvements. Once we do capital improvements, there'll probably be an increase in maintenance costs, but we certainly feel like that number is a safe number given how we're going to begin maintaining it with how we're receiving it.
Is the detention vault, whose detention vault is that?
I believe it's ours. It's coming off, it's draining the street.
Okay, so it's our vault.
It's our vault.
So the ownership of Triangle Park
Yeah.
would not impact the ownership or responsibilities associated with that detention vault?
I assume we have an easement for the stormwater facility.
We do, we will.
Well, I would ask my fellow council members if they're interested in, it seems like if we were to ask for that parcel of land, understanding that it might affect some maintenance costs down the road, but then we get to control it, it's the entrance to this trail, seems like it might be worth considering.
Before I would consider something like that, I would need to go back down there with that question in mind and that some more serious thought, and I think we would need to send it back to the administration to consider that also. So in that case, I would be asking if there was a timeline here or some sort of deadline we need to be aware of, and have it come back to Land and Shore before it goes to full council, if that's what we were wanting to look at. But I'm not opposed to that. I'm not opposed to the question being thoroughly considered.
Could it go back to full council with a potential amendment? So we could just talk about it at full council as sort of a very small last bit?
Well, I'm not sure it would be a small last bit, and it seems to me that that would be committee work, and if there wasn't a deadline, that it would just come back to the committee. Anyway, those are just my thoughts. Well,
The right-of-way is this paved trail.
The let's go back.
And it's going to connect to the shared use route is going to connect. That's going to be public domain, public space. It's going to connect on one end to 19th, the other end to Newport Way.
Yes,
And the last few feet, which has to rise something like 18 feet, is going to remain a shared use route. That's public domain, right?
yes.
And I think Tola's question is, if something could happen on either side of that, you're concerned about what can happen on the, outside the borders of the shared use route. And it's along the roadway, the driveway entranceway.
Right, this is the entrance road here.
I don't share the same concern. I'm okay with as proposed.
I would add, I think in terms of control, I understand that piece. I do think that the other consideration for Wolf and the city that hasn't been discussed is, as a piece of this entranceway, are there going to be different maintenance expectations between what the Parks Department can and will do and what Wolf might like to do? And so I think there was some hesitation that the frequency and level of maintenance may not be what Wolf would want. Now, I don't know that that is a, sorry. I don't know that that is, I'm not trying to say that's a determinant, it's just another factor that I wanted to add to the discussion.
Say that again? I'm not sure I understood it.
So Wolf will have a whole landscape crew that is dedicated to maintaining this entire property at the level at which they feel is necessary from a marketing perspective. That the budget, the frequency, the expectations may be different than what the city is willing or able to
understand.
perform for sort of the front door of the project. Again, I don't think that that is a reason to make a decision, it just is another consideration.
Okay. Yeah, it's a confounding factor that it's also essentially their front door, right? Because, I mean, I look at it on Google Earth and I'm just feeling aspirational, but I see, what if you put a piece of sculpture there? And it isn't a park, but you have a nice piece of sculpture as people are running along Newport. But I recognize that it's complicated and that it's also the entrance to a residential neighborhood and could be, it's not an ideal location for something like that. So I will, for administration's recommendation.
Ready for the, okay. Move to recommend that the full council authorize the mayor or her designee to accept dedication of the shared use route, park, and wetland property from the Wolf Company in the area of the Gateway Apartments along Newport Way Northwest as described. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks. The,
Would that be on the consent agenda?
Funny.
well, Paul says yes.
Really?
Yeah. I'll see
I
here.
would not recommend putting on a consent agenda because it's effectively a $2 million investment on the part of the city. Right?
$2 million investment. You know, it's a new of impact fees.
Yes.
So we're getting, so it's.
Wait, your microphone's on.
Thank you. It's in lieu, no, I don't look at quite the same. It's not like we have funds right now and we're trying to decide how to use them. We have, this development has to do something for parks, and this is the plan. And we're receiving something that they're going to build, and we're not really, and I mean, if you want more visibility into a new public amenity that's coming forward, then I'd say great, but I don't view it the same like we're making some decision about a capital investment.
So I would, thank you for that, Paul. I kind of do view it as a warranting visibility into a new amenity. I think it would be a significant connection. And I think we can have at least a brief presentation on what this is. And so the public can see. I would say regular.
Is that 2-1 for regular
Yeah,
versus
2 to 1.
consent, or?
Well, we'll
The only thing that matters is we're all in consensus
Recommending
about
approval.
accepting the,
And
going
placement.
forward.
Okay.
And placement
Where
on
it
the
is,
agenda
that's-
is ultimately
that's-
Stacy's.
Oh, okay.
It's not a
Yeah.
vote.
Right.
I'm a little rusty.
Ooh.
Plus, any council member can pull anything down off of the
Right.
consent agenda.
Right.
So it's not a matter of how many votes, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So we put it on the consent, then it just gets pulled down. We might as well just put it on regular.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, Agenda Bill 7683, amendments to Issaquah Municipal Code 18.07.480, Community Facility Standards Regarding Public Buildings, presented by Trish Heinonen, Public Policy Planning Manager. Apologize. Hey, Trish.
How are you guys?
Great.
Okay. Compact public buildings. You may remember some of this from last year when we were doing compact public schools. And we had government facilities in that originally, and there was some city property near the Highlands that sort of swept away the discussion to only be schools. And so we backed off the public buildings piece, and council approved the compact public schools piece last September. And so now we're coming back again for the part that we left on the table last time. So PPC had a public hearing and continued discussion in October and November. They renamed the topic a few times so they would feel more comfortable with the title. So it's now public buildings instead of some of the other names they had for it. We had some really good discussions with them. One of the pieces they asked for is in your packet is Exhibit B, which were all the FARs and of all the public buildings and public schools that they could think of in the area to see, even though they're not required to be compact, any of them, but just what was out there and what did they look like and what were we sort of thinking about. So the purpose of this amendment is to extend the public school compact facilities to be buildings and structures too. So we changed the purpose and intent a little bit. And we also learned from the school piece that we needed some definitions for this, for the public buildings. So there's two. One, obviously public buildings, but the other is we're pulling community space in from the central standards. And the reason for that is when we talked about buildings like the community center, and there's that beautiful lawn on the front that's used for concerts and all sorts of great things, we didn't want to ding a developer for having such a great outdoor space that adds to the beauty and wonder and use of the indoor space. So we wanted to call that out as something that they could get an exemption for the FAR, that it wouldn't be counted. So we needed that definition brought in. The rest is all the same as public schools. We also worked with the school district through all this about the FAR because Steve Crawford was saying that he thought it would be challenging to meet a 0.75 FAR. So we put after a lot of discussion with him and Planning Policy Commission, we all added the footnote 7 that it can be reduced by 50%, which is a 0.375 FAR, if needed for operational functions. And one of those functions would be if it's required for a curriculum, which would be a sports field. You know, if you're required for gym class or whatever it is to be outside and be using that, that wouldn't, that's something that they could use to decrease the FAR. Other than that, we also made it the same in the central standards to add public buildings. And that's, it's a pretty small amendment since you did the heavy lifting for public schools. And I have, if you wanted to look through any of the examples, I can get that online as well. But are there questions?
So one of the things, Trish, you might mention is the problem we're fixing is like public schools, municipal buildings are located in the CFF zone. And the way that the CFF zone works is basically you're limited to the standards, the least impactful standards of the adjacent zoning. So if you were going to build a new fire station or going to build, say, a new city hall at some point, if the adjacent zoning was, say, single-family suburban, then the highest and best, the highest building you could build might be 3 stories. And so what we're trying to do is be a little bit looking down the field, knowing that we're having conversations about both city halls someday and about fire stations, and knowing that there's other municipal facilities that are going to have this same problem potentially. It's the same issue as the school district has, and that is land is of a premium, which means we need smaller sites, which means the buildings need to get taller. So that's really why we're putting this forward. Is there's no project in the pipeline right now. But we know this will be an issue for us in the future, and we're trying to get it taken care of in advance.
Questions?
So there's community facilities and then there's community facilities, right? We have had,
And then there's community facilities.
right. So we've had discussions in the past of community facilities that didn't actually really feel like community facilities, right? There have been upon times been developments that had things that qualified as community facilities, but that didn't have particular access to the public or feel like things that the public would feel entitled to go to, right?
I'm not following you, but are you following?
Tennis courts?
I was thinking, aren't there community facilities at Costco that no non-Costco employee is ever expected to utilize, for instance?
No, those would not be, so those would be, there's a little bit of nomenclature thing going on here. So those are community spaces.
Okay.
But what we're talking about is the zoning. So the zoning for community facilities are things like schools and city halls and fire stations.
No, that I get, but there was
Yeah.
this exemption for, Trish, you mentioned it, in the computation of the FAR, wasn't it? Community space is not counted in the FAR calculation.
So the thing about,
Sorry, I said community facilities. I should have said
Yeah.
community space. There are community spaces and then there are community spaces.
Right, so community spaces as with Costco is not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is, most community facilities, whether it be a fire station or a community center or a city hall, would have some sort of common outdoor amenity like a plaza or a green space that would go with it, which then makes it difficult to meet the FAR. And even like a fire station, if you think about the fire station in the Highlands, they actually have drive-through bays, so they have like driveways on both sides, and some of those things make it very difficult to meet the FAR. So what we were trying to do was to put a provision in here that recognized that those community facility type buildings have certain outdoor spaces that are necessary just because of their function, which is different than like the Costco semi-public community spaces around their office buildings.
Okay. On the one space, in the one area you say for FAR you don't have to count community space, and then you have operational functions that include outdoor space. You can reduce the FAR for those. The fundamental thing here is this whole thing is designed to help push density, but there seems to be just a lot of loopholes on density. Is this gonna, do we know that this would result in schools or public buildings that would be higher density than they would be otherwise?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
So we looked at, so the fire station next to the Sound Transit Garage, which I think we all would perceive as being fairly dense. And the fire station up in the Highlands, which we all kind of say is fairly dense. This is denser than either of those. So these provisions, even with the credit, call it a credit, would result in denser municipal buildings or public buildings than what we're getting now. Allows a smaller footprint.
okay. Fire Station 72 is 0.42, so it's a little bit higher, but
Yeah.
okay. Fire Station 73 in the Highlands is 0.31.
Yeah. So, and I mean, it's allowing that credit, it's not mandating that credit. So this is helping us meet standards without having to do an adjustment of standards. But if we wanted to do something that was much denser, let's assume we control all the buildings we build, right? I mean, it comes through you guys make the decisions. If we wanted to do something denser, we could do something denser. That's a minimum. The max is 2 FAR.
I don't have any other questions. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I do, but I can.
I don't have any concerns about what's in front of us, what we're being asked to consider. I recognize that even though areas within the city will be getting denser because that the public services required to be in proximity to serve those areas have special requirements. And this is allowed, but at the same time, those public services have to compete for land and the price of land. So this is a way, this changes some of the basics so that they can be built denser than they have been required or allowed to in the past to move toward that goal of more density, but still allow for the special requirements they have for space. That makes sense to me.
So does the administration recommendation differ in any way from the PPC recommendation?
No.
All right, pages 34 and 36. So there's specific language regarding minor and major utilities. Tell me about that sort of language.
Do you want me to get it on the screen?
Sure.
Let's see if I can, now that I just said that I could.
Before is,
Can you see it there?
what, yeah, there you go.
Way bigger, that's good.
Is that a little bigger?
That was-
We realized that these, they're not for occupancy, and so we didn't want them to have to be built, to have an FAR or have to go through any of those kinds of hoops if they're, pump stations, and we didn't want all of a sudden all the facilities to go through this maximum FAR or minimum FAR, and so we tried to clean this up to make it fit with the new hope that they'll all be compact and smaller footprint, and because with utilities, sometimes you really can't compromise some of that, and so we tried to make it make more sense with the new compact idea.
Okay, thank you.
Does that work?
Yeah, the next one on page 36, table 18.07.480.
Okay.
Build to line is 0 to 20 feet? How is it 0 or is it 20?
Have you, Keith, you always,
Like that seems like that cries out to be a single number or to be annotated to explain the range.
I've always thought if you're a school, because of the whole buses and kids, and that that you have a different leeway than if you're a fire station or a community center, or, but I can let Keith speak to that, because you had to describe the build-to lines to.
So is that not a change, reading your table, the way you're?
No, it's the same from, it's the same from compact schools.
Okay, so with compact, I'm trying to remember the conversation we had with compact schools. So Trish, the star, where's the star footnote?
I think it's actually a 6.
Was it a
I think
6?
It's just
Oh, right,
horribly,
for
horribly
maximum?
hard
Yeah,
to read.
that's
There's a 2 and a 6, yeah.
Okay. Build-to line is a required placement of the buildings on property frontage between the building and the right-of-way or private street edge if there is no right-of-way. Additional requirements for the area in between the property line can be found in subsection E13 of this section. I actually can't answer that question. I don't know what that means.
That was left over from schools, so we didn't change it.
You may need to go back and resurrect that conversation we had that created that. So that's not a change in this proposed bill.
It just caught my eye because as a standard,
It's wonky. So I think either one, we can bring this back and give you guys an explanation, but since it's not a change, we can provide you with a response, and if it seems like it's something that we need to fix when we update Title 18 next year, I just update it, fix it next year.
The agenda bill calls for it coming back to full council January 22nd or sooner. So if we wanted to, we could just have it come back 1st of January.
Well, I'll wait to say something
Sure.
until I hear public comment and we deliberate on it. I do have one last question, though. On page 37, when we talk about requiring 50% parking in structure, so do we know what that would mean for, let's say, a new city hall? We've been talking about the facilities study that we've been running. Do we know just to pick a notional project, like what that requirement would mean cost-wise to something like a new city hall?
So, I don't know. It's been a while since we've done some possible site plans and the parking counts. I don't remember, but this becomes a function of the cost of structured parking versus the cost of the property. And I think in our mind, because the city council kind of made a very clear decision about commercial space, private commercial space, having a requirement for 50% parking, it seemed like we needed to treat ourselves similarly. So yes, there is a cost here. Those spaces in a structured parking garage are going to run somewhere between $22,000 to $30,000 in lieu of six. So there is a cost there, but there's also a cost to the land. And since we're at, $1.5 million an acre right now, citywide, I don't know, I haven't done an analysis to see if it's actually cheaper to put those vehicles, and the problem with the city is you also have the fleet vehicles you have to deal with, right? So we don't just have employee parking, but you also have fleet vehicles. So it's a lot of vehicles. I don't know the answer right now, if that is something you would like for us to do a little bit of.
No, I mean, I guess, at $30K a pop, if you say you have 200 parking stalls total and you have 100 structured for fleet and staff and IPD and all that kind of stuff, it's $3 million on a $50 million project, to throw a number out there.
Yeah.
So, okay. And I mean, I hear the argument that we're asking it of private industry. We should ask the same of ourselves as we do of others. That's a reasonable response. Thank you.
Well,
Yeah, that conversation envisions something like we would locate a fleet place inside the central area. These are just that parking conversation and having to account for fleet vehicles.
Yeah.
I mean, that assumes that, we might consider a fleet location in the central area.
I'm making the assumption that if we built a new city hall, there would be fleet vehicles there like there are right now with City Hall Northwest. I mean, those departments have their city vehicles parked in that parking lot outside City Hall Northwest.
Yeah, but okay, nothing like PWO.
No, I mean, it would not be like the Vector truck and the snowplows would not be parked at the new city hall. They would stay at operations. The conversations, at least we've had so far, about if there was a new facility, it would be City Hall Northwest, Mayor's Office, Finance, OS, police stays in that building, and PWO stays in their building.
any other questions? Oh.
It was more just a comment that, and these would apply if they're in the central area.
Yeah.
But this zone is all over though, so it's not just central.
Oh, IMC and central?
Right,
would
well,
be
this zone, community
for CFF
facilities
citywide.
is in all of them, right? Because it's the zone that it's changing the standards in the zone, and this zone is in both central and in outside central.
Okay.
Are we ready for public comment?
Yeah.
Okay. Time for public comment.
So parks facilities are not clear. It gives an example, for example, the pool and the community center, but there's no defining line to say when a parks building would need to become urban. So I don't know what the criteria are for that. Like if you took Pickering Barn and you said, wow, we're going to go over the 75% of the value of Pickering Barn and do a remodel, would you then have to fit these standards? And it's just not clear where the breaking line is. Are there exemptions for historical buildings that you don't want to do this to? So it seems pretty broad without very many exemptions in a place where we have a lot of public buildings of a large variety. And so it makes me uneasy because I don't understand when you're saying, oh, this is one of those that has to have an urban footprint if we do. And I also don't know what the threshold criteria is for when you change an existing building when it has to go to the standards. Does that fall back onto the 75% of value or whatever it is? So I guess that's a beginning.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? All right. I think that's all the members of the public we have here. Follow-up?
I'm good with it now that I've had the answers to those questions. I think the 0 to 10 is not anything I want to bring it back to committee on.
What about the question about, can you answer the question about when the standards apply? So if you're doing a remodel or Connie's question?
Trish?
I'm sorry, I thought she asked you. I'm sorry.
Or Bill, right?
Right, I'm sorry, but I thought.
I was looking at Keith.
Right.
I was looking at Keith.
We've envisioned that if it's a new building, obviously they would have to fit the new standards. But I would guess the remodel standard is, I think it's right around what you said, the 75%, but that's something that we could look into. We don't have anything listed for historic buildings, but that might be, when you think of putting a roof on the town hall, that certainly wouldn't trigger it. I'm having a hard time thinking of an expansion of a historic building, but we could put a provision in there that if we are expanding the barn or if we're expanding the depot, or that it wouldn't have to have the same urban feel as the others to maintain the historic nature of it, if that's something that you would want to do.
You have a
Not a different comment.
Okay.
So typically things like, let me weigh in a little bit. So let's take a good example, because I think City Hall Northwest is a good example. Let's assume that the council decides that we're going to keep that facility as a City Hall facility for a number of years. One of the presentations I think you guys got from the space planning consultant is there needs to be some significant improvements done to that building if it's going to be retained as office space. It will clearly eclipse 75% of the value of that building. These provisions deal with like change of use, they deal with expansions. So if we wanted to build onto that building, it's going to trigger these provisions. If all we're doing is maintenance on that building, new roof, seismic upgrades, flooring, You do that as just part of ongoing maintenance and upkeep. It doesn't trigger, if you were just staying within the existing footprint of the building and doing stuff within that building, it wouldn't trigger this.
Say that?
I believe the different part of city code says that in terms of change of use. So the change of use thing is the big one. So if it's change of use and you did all those improvements to the building, yes, it's going to trigger this. But then if we sold, the only reason there'd be change of use is if we sold the property, and then it would not be zoned CFF any longer. It'd be zoned commercial.
Right.
It would be urban core.
I realize there's another part of the code that talks about when things apply, but it makes me a little bit nervous that we're having to, so Tricia's answer was, I think we envision new buildings, and then I would guess at 75%. So, and then you're saying it's in somewhere else in part of the code, which it
Right.
probably is.
Yep.
So to me, the question is whether we want to bring it back with that answer and the 0 to 20-foot setback answer. Or do we want those answers in the bill to come forward?
I would be fine with either.
I did assume that it was coming back here in January, because that's how the bill is written,
Okay.
and I'm fine with that.
All right.
Okay.
So we've got a couple questions, and.
Yep.
Yeah, Paul?
You want to go back. This is a bill that updates both IMC and central area, and so my mistake earlier, and you still have that page up there, and this is a section of IMC. Right
This
below
is
it
in
is
the
the
IMC,
section, is
right.
where central area.
Yeah.
Right.
Central starts it there. So go back up to 37, go back up. No, you're
Oh,
there.
right
you're
here?
there. Yeah.
Parking?
It's 37 on my machine, that's different in your document, it's 11 there. I have the full bill here, full packet. We have a 50% structured parking in the central area.
And in the villages.
And for compact schools.
But not in the IMC. Except that there's the special sections for villages.
So when you geographically think
get
of the whole city,
Yeah.
you've got central, you got the villages. What's left is not a lot.
Where we sit right now.
Old Town, so Old Town has different
There's other
standards.
areas, yeah.
Yeah.
But I understand that.
But this, when you amended for compact schools, you were amending it for the IMC for all the properties zoned community facilities. And so you were, because it was right after the moratorium, you were trying to get that into the rest of the city.
We were just hearing schools.
Yeah.
schools.
No, I think Paul's talking commercial, and I think,
Yes.
to his point, there are places that you can build commercial in the city, outside of Central, outside of the villages, where the 50% structured parking provision is not currently applicable. I don't know, we'd have to look at the zoning map to see how much geography that is. I don't think it's a lot. So if there is enough out there that would cause you to say, yeah, let's not put this on new city facilities, that's your discretion to do that. We can provide more information, since we're coming back anyway. If you want us to provide,
I'm not sure I'm asking for any more information,
Sure.
but it is kind of a new way for me to think about what we did last year.
yeah,
There's a reason we have boundaries on those villages and on the central area, and there are areas outside of that. When the structured parking requirements that inside central are specific for different types of uses and sizes, and those are for the central area. And just the way that you presented this, so we thought, you know, and I wasn't thinking about the schoolwork earlier, was it this year or was that last year?
That was last year.
That was last year, yes. That we were taking that code for the central and say, you know, and for structured parking, let's just make sure we apply that elsewhere. Now, for community facility schools, yes, we did. And I know a lot of that had to do, I mean, we really were thinking about being empathetic to the cost of land and the special use requirements that they have.
Yeah.
This is a little bit different.
I have actually a great hypothetical.
Okay.
So let's say that EFER decided they wanted to completely rebuild their admin outside of Central. It's currently doesn't have structured parking, right? So a new site plan for that would have to, if we adopted this code the way it was proposed, would have to have 50% structured parking. Now, I would personally advocate that I think that's probably the right choice. A better use of property, it would leave more of their property to use for something else, but there's a difference between allowing that versus mandating that, which is what's being proposed with the code.
All right, that's a good example, thank you. And I realize we're not making any decisions tonight, we're going to come back.
Right.
And I think that, I wanted to daylight that, thank you.
We're going to bring this back at the first meeting in January. Thanks, Trish.
You're welcome.
The last item on our agenda, Agenda Bill 7680. Yes, it's not. Oh, yeah, amendments to Central Standards Table 4.3A, level of review, presented by Development Services, staff member Emily Arteche.
Arteche. Good evening. My name is Emily Arteche. I'm Senior Planner with Development Services, and I'm here to present a fairly straightforward and simple proposed amendment, which also originated, well, it could go elsewhere, but
was the
it
kiss of
should,
death right
it
there.
should, no, I did not. I
You'll be here
said
6 months.
straightforward, and which we like to use. It's one that we already have right now. Level 3 review is actually something that we apply throughout the city, but the standards and the criteria that are associated with level 3 are not exactly consistent throughout the city. So you just begin the slideshow. So what are levels of review? You may or may not be familiar with levels of review, but you know, they help determine what the review process, who the decision maker is going to be. And the city has several levels of review. There's a small chart at the bottom showing that we've got 6 total, and the one that we're dealing with here tonight is right in the middle. It's a mid-range, so it's not the most simplest, but it's not the most complex either. And this particular level of review 3, just to give you some basic background, would require the Development Commission to review the applications. We did meet with the Development Commission, by the way, and the Policy Planning Commission. They both were very excited about this particular amendment coming their way for lots of good reasons. They like to review applications, and they know that it's in the best interest of the public as well, because it gives them an opportunity to see projects come through, especially of high visibility. As I mentioned earlier when I began the presentation, this level 3 review is something that already exists right now, this particular criteria, in Issaquah Highlands and Talus. And so the attempt here is to try and bring that consistency to Central Issaquah. And I've summarized what the basic components of the amendment would be, and this is what's in the Highlands and Talus. It's requiring a level 3 review when development proposals come in that are greater than 45,000 square feet, gross square feet of proposed development. or greater than 3 acres, or they're listed, or they're abutting, have frontage or access onto major corridors, so that the parcels associated with that. And then fine details, you can see also that the parcel size, if it's combined total ownership of 3 or more acres, would also equal a level 3 review. And the reason why we're bringing it forward tonight is that there was some expectation that the consistency would be brought over to Central Issaquah, and it hasn't up until this point. And so for that reason, it's moving forward. And there's also a desire amongst the public, and I think the city too has recognized that folks want to be aware of and have opportunities to comment on projects where they would notice a significant change, in their in visibility, and these are fairly substantial sized projects when you get parcels that large and development proposals that great. So you may be wondering where these corridors would be listed, and so there's a new proposed map associated with Central Issaquah, and the blue lines indicate where properties would be required to have a level 3 review if they were located on one of these blue corridors or met one of the other threshold criteria associated with the proposed amendment. And on this particular map, you can see that the shaded areas indicate specific properties that do have frontage access along the blue corridors and/or are greater than 3 acres in size. So there's not much left in Central Issaquah that couldn't meet a level 3 review, but a few white unshaded parcels are still potentially out there for a lower threshold review.
Before we move on,
Go ahead.
was that previous diagram in our packet? I don't think it was. So
No.
I liked it, by the way.
Yeah,
I liked it a
it
lot.
was not in the packet. It was something I was using as an internal review mechanism. And let me just figure out, how do I
Page
go
up.
back?
Page up.
Oh, page up, okay. Thank you. So, yeah, it was something that we were doing internally to kind of gauge, well, what would be the potential impact or effectiveness of this particular level 3 review threshold amendment. And so what we realized is that, yeah, we're going to pick up most everything in Central Issaquah with getting folks into this level of review, and for good reasons.
Yeah, it's a very useful, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that should be included in the packet.
Right, because I was going
Going
to.
forward.
Oh, wonderful. I'll make note of that.
Does answer my question, like, how do you identify a property that might front?
Right. I kept
90.
it a little fuzzy because when you put properties on a map, it does sometimes trigger, no pun intended, but, all kinds of, concerns sometimes. And these properties, by all means, have nothing to do with any official applications that the city would have on file right now for review or anything like that. They're just indicators of property greater than 3 acres and property that would have the access, the frontage along the blue corridors.
So this is part of your analysis.
Right, yeah.
So for us to consider this is potential impact in terms of,
Partially, yeah. Yeah, not the full, but yeah.
Right.
Right.
Good, because it was very difficult to work with the other one because everything was white, and I couldn't imagine that all these parcels.
Right. The other
were
one
affected.
was designed specifically to assist the internal review team with identifying fairly quickly in a different way without a list or a text format. Because when you look at a text format, you see a paragraph of streets and it doesn't end. And it becomes very challenging at times to determine, quickly if someone's going to be at a level 3 review or not. So the map was created to help provide that visual aid.
Right, and this one goes further in that if you just follow with your eyes the blue lines,
Correct.
You can imagine that you're traveling down a roadway, this is and then this properties that are highlighted, I guess there's the two shades. The darker shade is what again?
So one is, existing parcels that are greater than 3 acres, and the other one is, I fuzzed it out just kind of purposely, so.
Okay.
And the other one is, let me just read it. Oh, additional properties covered by the corridor, the darker one. So I picked up anything that was greater than 3 acres, and I didn't try to match common ownership parcels, so there's that component out there. And then the second one is if there were any additional parcels that I could pick up just by having them touch the blue line, just by knowing that they either had frontage or access off the blue corridors.
Okay, so it's only the white ones on here that wouldn't.
That are potentially added to 1 or 0.
Right, so you
Right.
can imagine then, the exception of the white ones, it's likely that all the parcels shaded on here would be subject to this review, level 3 review, depending on the specifications of the change.
Yes, and the fine details do indicate that we wouldn't be interested in seeing a level 3 review before Development Commission with certain applications below a gross square feet of proposed development. I believe it's 4,000.
Right,
Yeah.
pretty small, yeah.
So just to be clear, this is a snapshot in time, right? Because parcel boundaries can change.
Absolutely, yeah.
And, you could potentially segregate out your property and create a parcel that's now not touching the blue line. You know what I mean? So that's one of the reasons why this is a good working document in terms of to show how it exists today. But parcel lines change, property owners change. So this could change over time, which is one of the reasons why I don't think we're recommending like we include this document in code, but rather the one that might be less insightful, because it is static, right? Those streets are those streets.
Yeah, and I think there's opportunities to always come back if you are curious about, the future, what sometime in the future, if you want to see this map again, and if any changes were to occur, that might be an option.
Simply said, the point I was trying to make is that this gives me a visual of if the desire was for kind of greater public opportunity to comment on certain development, then this gives me a visual of where throughout the city.
Absolutely,
or
yes.
in the central area where this would be in effect.
You're correct.
That's the value of this.
Yeah, that's the value, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Any questions?
Thank you. So I'm looking at the bottom of page 49 of the packet, which is the first page of the bill. And so is the intent here anywhere that's a blue street, any development on the street, if it's more than 4,000 square feet, is going to get a level 3 review?
Well, the 4,000 was specifically called out saying that if you're on the blue line corridor and you're proposing 4,000 or less, no, you're not required. We didn't want to just force everybody that's associated with the blue corridors to go to Development Commission. We realized there's some threshold that ought to be acknowledged to allow simple development to occur without maximum, legislative process.
Okay. Then I think that the sentence, if the application meets the number 2 and number 3 thresholds, I think that should say or. 2 or number 3.
Okay. And is that with the sentence that says the proposed amendment would require level 3 review for an
It doesn't
application?
mention the 4,000, right? It only mentions the 4,000 in that sentence.
Yeah, you'd have to read the actual detailed amendment, but yeah, we could add that in there, and I think that would be a nice amendment.
No, I'm confused. I'm saying that I think that's a typo in that line. if the application meets the number 2 and number 3 thresholds, right? If it meets the number 2 threshold and is less than 4,000 square feet, it should not be subject to level 3 review, independent of whether it meets the number 3 threshold.
I'm sorry, are you in the agenda bill or in the actual amendment?
I am in the packet, the first page of the bill at the bottom. The proposed amendment would require level 3 review for an application that meets any of the following thresholds, 1,
Okay.
2, and 3. Then the next sentence after that says, if an application meets the number 2 and number 3 thresholds, but is less than 4,000 gross floor
Oh,
area.
yeah, right, mm-hmm,
I suspect that the word "and" is a typo.
right,
The word "or."
right. You're correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Ready for public comment? Paul, are you ready? Or did you have another question? All right. Did you have more?
I just,
We jumped the gun, sorry. Did
if you want, you're welcome to conclude. I mean,
you have more slides?
yeah. This is one that's in your packet. I'm not sure if there's any comments on it, but it's the same, that's in your packet. And then this is the timeline. I mentioned earlier that we did meet with PPC and Development Commission, and they applauded this proposed amendment, and we're excited to see it go forward. And it did get referred from council to you. We do have another date potentially scheduled with you, if you'd like for us to come back. We've kind of earmarked the early January, and then moving to council after that. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask, and we'll work through those.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I think now we're ready for public comment. Connie is again excited to speak to us.
I'm excited. This is like hot spit. This is turning into a good year. This is awesome.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll just repeat that, yes.
Right, David Kapler says +1.
For once.
Okay, does anybody have any concerns about this? No?
Oh, I think it's great.
So would the committee entertain a motion to recommend that the full council adopt the administration's recommendation? All those in favor? Aye, aye, aye. And that would come to the first meeting in January on consent?
Sure.
There you go. Yeah. She's jealous. Do we have any other business? The next meeting is January 3rd. Just enough time to recover.
Chat before the year end, obviously, about the agenda,
Okay.
and if you want to do it pre-land and shore. All
All
right,
right.
Daniel?
We're adjourned. Oh,
So we should get with Stacy, because we're on a short window because of holidays, so probably get her the proposed agenda for Jan 3 if we haven't already. And then if she wants to sit and meet and talk about that with staff,
I think
We should do that.
we're adjourned.
awesome. Oh, wow.